Today's video begins with Beowulf about to dive down to the bottom of the lake to kill Grendel's mother. We ended with him having some request for Hrothgar in case he didn't come back, and now he is about to go down to the lair. So we're at about line 1490 in the book. After these words, the Prince of the Weathergates was impatient to be away and plunged suddenly. Without more ado, he dived into the heaving depths of the lake. It was the best part of a day before he could see the solid bottom. We knew Beowulf wasn't an ordinary guy, right? He has a strength of 30 men in each arm, and now we find out he can also hold his breath for about a day. So not a typical person. Quickly the one who haunted those waters, who had scavenged and gone her gluttonous rounds for 100 seasons, sensed a human observing her outlandish lair from above. So she lunged and clutched and managed to catch him in her brutal grip. But his body, for all that, remained unscathed. The mesh of the chainmail saved him on the outside. Here we have Beowulf. He's swimming down to the bottom of the lake for the better part of a day. All of a sudden, Grendel's mom starts trying to fight him. And unlike when he fought Grendel, he is wearing chainmail over his body, which protects him from her talons in her attack. Her savage talons failed to rip the web of his war shirt. Then once she touched the bottom, that wolfish swimmer carried the ring-mailed prince to her court, so that for all his courage he could never use the weapons he carried. And a bewildering horde came at him from the depths, droves of sea beasts who attacked with tusks and tore at his chainmail in a ghastly onslaught. The gallant man could see he had entered some hellish turnhole, and yet the water did not work against him, because the hull roofing held off the force of the current. Then he saw firelight, a gleam and flare-up, a glimmer of brightness. So Grendel's mom is attacking him. We have a couple of sea beasts attacking him, and she finally drags Beowulf down to this underwater lair where she and her son Grendel lived. And this is one of those parts of the book where you really have to use your imagination, and it's up to like your kind of interpretation of what this is. Is it some type of cave under the lake where the water can't get into? Is it some sort of magical air bubble situation that they're living in at the bottom of the lake? The book isn't entirely clear. What we do know is it's some sort of layer at the bottom of the lake where the water cannot infiltrate, because that last line I read you says, then he saw firelight, a gleam and flare up, a glimmer of brightness. So we have this fire going inside this cave, home-like structure at the bottom of the lake. Again, up for your imaginative interpretation of what exactly that looked like. The hero observed that swamp thing from hell. Oh, poor Grendel's mom. The Tarn hag in all her terrible strength, then heaved his war sword and swung his arm. The decorated blade came down ringing and singing on her head, but he soon found his battle torch extinguished. The shining blade refused to bite. Remember, Unferth, trying to make up with Beowulf, gives Beowulf his sword Hrunting that has never lost in battle. Beowulf brings it down with him to the lair, tries to decapitate Grendel's mom with it, but it doesn't work against her. So the first time ever, Hrunting fails. It spared her and failed the man in his need. It had gone through many hand-to-hand fights, had hewed the armor and and helmets of the doomed, but here at last the fabulous powers of that heirloom failed. Hygelac's kinsman kept thinking about his name and fame. He never lost heart. Then in a fury he flung his sword away. The keen inlaid, worm-looped patterned steel was hurled to the ground. He would have to rely on the might of his arm. So must a man do who intends to gain enduring glory in combat. Life doesn't cost him a thought. Then the Prince of Wargates, warming to this fight with Grendel's mother, gripped her shoulder and laid about him in a battle frenzy. He pitched his killer opponent to the floor, but she rose quickly and retaliated, grappled him tightly in her grim embrace. The sure-footed fighter felt daunted. The strongest of warriors stumbled and fell. So she pounced upon him and pulled out a broad-whetted knife. Now she would avenge her only child. But the mesh of chainmail on Beowulf's shoulder shielded his life, turned the edge and tip of the blade. The son of Ecgtheow would have surely perished, and the Geats lost their warrior under the wide earth had the strong links and locks of his war gear not helped to save him. Holy God decided the victory. It was easy for the Lord, the ruler of heaven, to redress the balance once Beowulf got back up on his feet. So Beowulf and Grendel's mother, they're going back and forth in this fight, hand-to-hand combat. She takes out this kind of like short knife and tries to plunge it into Beowulf's shoulder. But again, he has chainmail on, which saves him. Okay, he decided to wear it for this fight, but not with the fight with Grendel. And so we have them going back and forth here, and it doesn't seem like there's a clear victor at the moment. But then he saw a blade that boded well, a sword in her armory, an ancient heirloom from the days of the giants, an ideal weapon, one that any warrior would envy, but so huge and heavy of itself, only Beowulf could wield it in battle. So the Shielding's hero, hard-pressed and enraged, took a firm hold of the hilt and swung the blade in an arc, a resolute blow that bit deep into her neckbone and severed it entirely, toppling the doomed house of her flesh. She fell to the floor. The sword dripped blood. The swordsman was elated. Seems like all hope is lost. Beowulf's looking all around this lair, and then he sees lying on the floor this massive sword. It's called the Sword of the Giants, from days gone. And so he picks up this sword of the giants that only he could pick up because, again, he has a strength of 30 men in each arm. So he's able to pick up the sword of the giants, and he swings it, and he cuts Grendel's mom's head off. So he kills Grendel's mom with this giant sword. A light appeared. And the place brightened the way the sky does when heaven's candle is shining clearly. Oh, that's a fun kenning. Heaven's candle is the sun. He inspected the vault, with sword held high, its hilt raised to guard and threaten, Hygelac's thane scouted by the wall in Grendel's wake. Now the weapon was to prove its worth. The warrior determined to take revenge for every gross act Grendel had committed, and not only for that one occasion when he'd come to slaughter the sleeping troops, 15 of Hrothgar's house guards surprised on their benches and ruthlessly devoured, and as many again carried away, a brutal plunder. Beowulf in his fury now settled that score. He saw the monster in his resting place, war-weary and wrecked, a lifeless corpse, a casualty of the battle in Heorot. The body gaped at the stroke dealt to it after death. Beowulf cut the corpse's head off. After he kills Grendel's mother, he's walking around, he's checking out the rest of this lair, and he comes upon Grendel's dead body. And he takes the sword of the giants, and he cuts Grendel's head off. Immediately, the counselors keeping a lookout with Hrothgar, watching the lake water, saw a heave up and surge of waves and blood in the backwash. They bowed gray heads, spoke in their sage, experienced way about the good warrior, how they never again expected to see that prince returning in triumph to their king. It was clear to many that the wolf of the deep had destroyed him forever. The 9th hour of the day arrived. The brave Shieldings abandoned the cliff top, and the king went home. But, sick at heart, staring at the mirror, the strangers held on. They wished without hope to behold their lord, Beowulf himself. So the book takes us back up to the top of the lake where the Danes and the Geats are awaiting to see what happens with Beowulf and Grendel's mother. And they start to see all this blood and gore rise to the surface of the lake. And the book tells us that the Shieldings, okay, so the Danes, they all think that's Beowulf's blood. So they're like, rip Beowulf, he didn't make it. And so all the Danes go back to Heorot Hall. But the warriors that Beowulf brought with him, okay, the Geats, they stay. And they're holding out hope that Beowulf is still alive. Meanwhile, The sword began to wilt into gory icicles to slather and thaw. It was a wonderful thing, the way it all melted as ice melts when the Father eases the fetters off the frost and unravels the water ropes. He who wields power over time and tide, he is the true Lord. The book also tells us here that that giant sword that Beowulf used to kill Grendel's mother and then decapitate Grendel, that it starts to melt away. Okay. And all that's left is the hilt, the handle of that sword. The gate captain saw treasure in abundance, but carried no spoils from those quarters except for the head and the inlaid hilt embossed with jewels. Its blade had melted and the scroll work on it burnt, so scalding was the blood of the poisonous fiend who had perished there. The book goes on to tell us that apparently there's a lot of treasure in this lair of Grendel and Grendel's mother. However, Beowulf is only going to take two things with him back to the surface, and that is the hilt of the sword, of the giant sword, and it tells us in that selection I just read that the reason why it was melting is because Grendel's blood was poisonous. So he's taking back the hilt of the giant sword with him, and he's also taking back the head of Grendel with him. So the question is, why is he taking Grendel's head back with him, but not Grendel's mom's head? The reason is, if you haven't guessed it already, Grendel terrorized the Danes for 12 years. Grendel's mom attacked them one night. And yes, they know that Grendel was dealt a fatal wound in his battle with Beowulf, but they never saw the body. And so for someone to have terrorized you for 12 years and they're supposedly dead, but you never saw the body, you're always going to have that question in your mind of, are they really dead or not? So Beowulf is bringing the Danes proof that yes, Grendel is dead. Yes, his reign of terror truly is at an end. Then away he swam, the one who had survived the fall of his enemies, flailing to the surface. The wide water, the waves and pools were no longer infested once the wandering fiend let go of her life in this unreliable world. The seafarer's leader made for land, resolutely swimming, delighted with his prize, the mighty load he was lugging to the surface. His thanes advanced in a troop to meet him, thanking God and taking great delight in seeing their prince back safe and sound. Quickly the hero's helmet and mail shirt were loosed and unlaced. The lake settled. Clouds darkened above the bloodshot depths. With high hearts they headed away along footpaths and trails through the fields, roads they knew, each of them wrestling with the head they were carrying from the lakeside cliff. Men kingly in their courage and capable of difficult work. It was a task for four to hoist Grendel's head on a spear and bear it under strain to the bright hall. But soon enough they neared the place, 14 gates in fine fettle, striding across the outlying ground in a delighted throng around their leader. It tells us here that it takes 4 of Beowulf's men to carry Grendel's head back, right? They stick it on a spear and they're carrying it back with them to Harrett Hall. Again, just emphasizing how strong Beowulf is. He was able to carry Grendel's head by himself, and it takes 4 of his men to carry this. In he came then, the Thane's commander, the arch-warrior, to address Hrothgar. His courage was proven, his glory was secure. Grendel's head was hauled by the hair, dragged across the floor where the people were drinking, a horror for both queen and company to behold. They stared in awe. It was an astonishing sight. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. So, son of Healfdene, prince of the Shieldings, we are glad to bring this booty from the lake. It is a token of triumph, and we tender it to you. I barely survived the battle under water. It was hard fought, a desperate affair that could have gone badly. If God has not helped me, the outcome would have been quick and fatal. Although hunting is hard-edged, I could never bring it to bear in battle. The Lord of men allowed me to behold, for he often helps the unbefriended, an ancient sword shining on the wall, a weapon made for giants, there for the wielding. Then my moment came in the combat, and I struck the dwellers in that den. Next thing, the damask sword blade melted. It bloated and it burned in their rushing blood. I wrested the hilt from the enemy's hand, avenged the evil done to the Danes. It is what was due. And this I pledge, O Prince of the Shieldings, you can sleep secure with your company of troops in Harrett Hall. Never need you fear for a single thane of your sept or nation, young warriors or old, that laying waste of life that you and your people endured of yore. Beowulf here just quickly recapping for Hrothgar what happened underneath the water, reassuring them that the evils have all been dealt with. Then the gold hilt was handed over to the old lord, a relic from long ago for the venerable ruler. That rare smith work was passed on to the prince of the Danes when those devils perished. Once death removed that murdering, guilt-steeped, God-cursed fiend, eliminating his unholy life and his mother's as well. It was willed to that king who of all the lavish gift lords of the north was the best regarded between the two seas. Beowulf, not keeping this sword of the giants for himself, he gives the hilt of it to Hrothgar. Hrothgar spoke. He examined the hilt, that relic of old times. It was engraved all over and showed how war first came into the world and the flood destroyed the tribe of giants. They suffered a terrible severance from the Lord. The Almighty made the waters rise, drowned them in the deluge for retribution. In pure gold inlay on the sword guards, there were rune markings correctly incised, stating and recording for whom the sword had first been made and ornamented with its scroll-worked hilt. Then everyone hushed as the son of Healfdene spoke this wisdom. A protector of his people, pledged to uphold truth and justice and to respect tradition, is entitled to affirm that this man was born to distinction. Beowulf, my friend, your fame has gone far and wide. You are known everywhere. Hrothgar is inspecting the hilt of this giant sword, and on the hilt we have the story of how war first came to the world, and we also have the story of the flood. And if you're thinking, are you talking about Noah's Ark, like that flood? Yes, I am. I'm talking about that flood. In Genesis 6, it talks about how the flood wiped away the Nephilim from the world. And in some versions of the Bible, instead of saying the word Nephilim, it says the word giants. And this is the giant sword. So it basically talks about the end of their people and how this flood wiped them out from the face of the earth pretty much. We are going to skip the rest of that paragraph. We are going to continue to skip the next few. And if you look for line 1760, we are beginning with the paragraph that starts with, O flower of warriors. So I'll give you a minute to find that. So about line 1760, O flower of warriors. This is Hrothgar still speaking here. O flower of warriors, beware of that trap. Choose, dear Beowulf, the better part, eternal rewards. Do not give way to pride. For a brief while your strength is in bloom, but it fades quickly, and soon there will follow illness or the sword to lay you low, or sudden fire or surge of water, or jabbing blade or javelin from the air, or repellent age. Your piercing eye will dim and darken, and death will arrive, dear warrior, to sweep you away. Hrothgar tells Beowulf, look, your fame is going to know no bounds now that you have killed both Grendel and Grendel's mother. But in line 1760, he says, do not give way to pride. And this brings up one of my all-time favorite words that you definitely need to know, hubris, Hubris. Hubris means extreme pride. It is a type of pride that leads to a person's downfall. If you go back to sophomore year and the Greek tragedies that you read or watched, you had Medea, Oedipus Rex, you had all of the, if you read the Odyssey, Odysseus, all these people, their downfall is caused by their extreme pride. And that is what Hrothgar is warning Beowulf against here. Be wary of being too prideful. This is Hrothgar still speaking here. Just so I ruled the Ringdanes' country for 50 years, defended them in wartime with spear and sword against constant assaults by many tribes. I came to believe my enemies had faded from the face of the earth. We find out here in these lines, Hrothgar has been king for 50 years. We knew he was old, but we didn't know he was necessarily that old. So he has to be 70 plus. And the fact that he's been king for 50 years really does show us what a great king he is. The fact that he's been able to hold on to his kingdom for that long and his people have prospered so much under his rule He truly is a great king. Still, what happened was a hard reversal from the bliss to grief. Grendel struck after lying in wait. He laid waste to the land, and from that moment my mind was in dread of his depredations. So I praised God in his heavenly glory that I live to behold this head dripping blood, and that after such harrowing I can look upon it in triumph at last. Take your place then with pride and pleasure, and move to the feast. Tomorrow morning our treasure will be shared and showered upon you. The gate was elated and gladly obeyed the old man's bidding. He sat on the bench, and soon all was restored, the same as before. Happiness came back, the hall was thronged, and a banquet set forth. Black night fell and covered them in darkness. Then the company rose for the old campaigner. The gray-haired prince was ready for bed, and a need for rest came over the brave, shield-bearing gate. He was a weary seafarer, far from home, so immediately a house guard guided him out, one whose office entailed looking after whatever a thane on the road in those days might need or require. It was a noble courtesy. That great heart rested, the hall towered, gold-shingled and gabled, and the guests slept in it until the black raven with raucous glee announced heaven's joy, and to hurry of brightness overran the shadows. Warriors rose quickly, impatient to be off. Their own country was beckoning the nobles, and the bold voyager longed to be abroad his distant boat. Then that stalwart fighter ordered Hrunting to be brought to Unferth, and bade Unferth take the sword and thanked him for lending it. He said he had found it a friend in battle and a powerful help. He put no blame on the blade's cutting edge. He was a considerate man. Beowulf and his men, they're ready to get back to their own country. They've done what they came here to do, or Beowulf did. And Beowulf's getting ready to go. Before he leaves, he gives Hrunting back to Unferth. He doesn't blame Unferth and say, the sword didn't work, like it's all your fault. He says, thank you so much. This is a great blade. I appreciate your friendship, essentially. So that's sweet. They make up before he leaves. And there the warriors stood. Oh, just kidding. We're skipping this paragraph. And we are skipping the next paragraph. So we are starting with the stanza that begins with, then the Earl's defender. Then the Earl's defender furnished the hero with 12 treasures and told him to set out, sail with those gifts safely home to the people he loved, but to return promptly. And so the good and gray-haired Dane, that high-born king, kissed Beowulf and embraced his neck, then broke down in sudden tears. 2 forebodings disturbed him in his wisdom, but one was stronger. Nevermore would they meet each other face to face. Oh, this is so sad. So this is the last time Hrothgar and Beowulf are ever going to see each other. And such was his affection that he could not help being overcome. His fondness for the man was so deep-founded, it warmed his heart and wound the heartstrings tight in his breast. The embrace ended, and Beowulf, glorious in his gold regalia, stepped to the green earth. Straining at anchor and ready for boarding, his boat awaited him. So they went on their journey, and Hrothgar's generosity was praised repeatedly. He was a peerless king until old age sapped his strength and did him mortal harm, as it has done so many. So the book kind of lets us know this is the last time Beowulf and Hrothgar are ever going to see each other, and eventually Hrothgar is going to die from old age, which is impressive in those warring times back then. Down to the waves then, dressed in the web of their chainmail and war shirts, the young men marched in high spirits. The coastguard spied them, fain setting forth the same as before. His salute this time from the top of the cliff was far from unmannerly. He galloped to meet them, and as they took ship in their shining gear, he said how welcome they would be in Gateland. Then the broad hull was beached on the sand to be cargoed with treasure, horses, and war gear. The curved prow motioned, the mast stood high above Hrothgar's riches in the loaded hold. The guard who had watched the boat was given a sword with gold fittings, and in future days that present would make him a respected man at his place on the mead bench. Then the keel plunged and shook in the sea, and they sailed from Denmark. Beowulf and his men get in their boat, and they're sailing home now. Right away the mast was rigged with its sea shawl, sail ropes were tightened, timbers drummed, and stiff winds kept the wave crosser skimming ahead. As she heaved forward, her foamy neck was fleet and buoyant, a lapped prow loping over the currents, until finally the gates caught sight of coastland and familiar cliffs. The keel reared up, wind lifted it home, it hit on the land. The harbor guard came hurrying out to the rolling water. He had watched the offing long and hard, on the lookout for those friends. With the anchor cables, he moored their craft right where it had beached, in case a backwash might catch the hull and carry it away. Then he ordered the prince's treasure trove to be carried ashore. It was a short step from there to where Hrethel's son and heir, Hygelac the Gold Giver, makes his home on a secure cliff in the company of retainers. As a reminder, we're now back in Gatland, which is modern-day Sweden, and the king there of the Gates is Hygelac, and he is married to a woman named Hygd. The building was magnificent, the king majestic, ensconced in his hall, and although Hygd, his queen, was young, a few short years at court, her mind was thoughtful and her manners sure. Heref's daughter behaved generously and stinted nothing when she distributed bounty to the Gates. Beowulf has made it safely back home, and they're unloading the treasures from the boat and taking them to Hygelac's mead hall. And the book is going to go off on one of its tangents here. And yes, it's a great side story, but we are going to skip it. So we're skipping several pages. We are skipping pages. Okay, so we are going to start at about line 2145. Okay. So 2145 at the line that begins with "Thus the king acted." And this is Beowulf speaking here. If you have my book, it's page 147 at the top. This is Beowulf speaking here to Hygelac. Thus the king acted with due custom. I was paid in recompense completely, given full measure and freedom to choose from Hrothgar's treasures by Hrothgar himself. These, King Hygelac, I am happy to present to you as gifts. It is still upon your grace that all favor depends. I have few kinsmen who are close, my king, except for your kind self. Then he ordered the boar-framed standard to be brought, the battle-topping helmet, the mail shirt gray as hoarfrost, and the precious war sword, and proceeded with his speech. When Hrothgar presented this war gear to me, he instructed me, my lord, to give you some account of why it signifies his special favor. He said it had belonged to his older brother, King Herogar, who had long kept it, but that Herogar had never bequeathed it to his son Heroweird, that worthy scion, loyal as he was. Enjoy it well. So Beowulf here, he is giving the bulk of the treasure that he received from Hrothgar to his king, to Hygelac, showing his king honor here. Again, Beowulf not in these fights for the gold, but rather for the glory. So he's honoring his king here with all this treasure that Hrothgar gave to him. He's keeping a little bit for himself, but the majority is going towards his king. I hear 4 horses were handed over next. Beowulf bestowed 4 bay steeds to go with the armor, swift gallopers all alike. So ought a kinsman act, instead of plotting and planning in secret to bring people to grief, or conspiring to arrange death of comrades. The warrior king was uncle to Beowulf and honored by his nephew. Each was concerned for the other's good. I have heard he presented Hygd with a gorget. That's like one of those necklaces that kind of goes all the way up your neck. The priceless torque that the prince's daughter, Welchtheow, had given him, and 3 horses, supple creatures, brilliantly saddled. The bright necklace would be luminous on Hygd's breast. So not only does he honor his king, but he also honors his queen and gives some of the treasure to her as well. Thus Beowulf bore himself with valor. He was formidable in battle, yet behaved with honor and took no advantage. Never cut down a comrade who was drunk, kept his temper, and, warrior that he was, watched and controlled his God-sent strength and his outstanding natural powers. He had been poorly regarded for a long time, was taken by the Gates for less than he was worth, and their lord, too, had never much esteemed him in the mead hall. They firmly believed that he lacked force, that the prince was a weakling, but presently every affront to his deserving was reversed. The book lets us know that Beowulf wasn't always like this. He wasn't always this great revered warrior that songs were sung about all across the nation. Instead, he wasn't much when he was younger. People didn't think he would amount to much. He wasn't a great warrior, but he worked hard, and now he is the greatest warrior out there. The battle-famed king, bulwark of his earls, ordered a gold-chased heirloom of Hrethel's to be brought in. It was the best example of a gem-studded sword in the gate treasury. This he laid on Beowulf's lap, and then rewarded him with land as well, 7,000 hides, and a hall and a throne. Both owned land by birth in that country, ancestral grounds, but the greater right and sway were inherited by the higher born. Hygelac then gives Beowulf gifts to say thank you for bringing fame to our people. Gives him a sword. Can never have too many swords. This is a very fancy sword, though, right? It says it's gem-studded. He also gives him land. It says 7,000 hides. In England, one hide equals 120 acres. So you can imagine how much land is gifted to Beowulf here. And then because he is given so much land, Hygelac also gives him a hall and a throne. So he gets his own meat hall as well. So these are very generous gifts given to Beowulf by Hygelac as thanks for bringing glory to their people. And that is where we will stop with this reading.